Mill kicked me out, so I secretly sold our house and left them homeless. Right, first, let me admit, I may be the a-hole for thinking of it this way. Not sure what you guys would have done. Hear me out. My problem is my mother-in-law. She's excessively nosy. She has to have a say in all our matters. Her meddling pisses me off, especially in financial matters. These days, I feel like I'm competing with my mother-in-law for my wife's attention and care. I, 41M, have been married to my wife Mandy for 7 years. Before our mother-in-law entered our lives, or rather, my house, there were no red flags in our marriage. We were pretty happy and content with our lives. It started going south 2 years back when my Mill had a deadly accident. Half of her body was fractured. She had slim chances, but she survived. She could barely sit. Leading a normal life seemed far in sight. After spending a month at the hospital, it was time for discharge. Mandy is a single child. Her dad left her mum when she was a kid. He is a non-existent in their lives. Details of him are unrelated, so I'll skip it. Mother-in-law had been living alone until her accident. In this condition, it was impossible for her to survive alone, so Mandy insisted we move Mill in with us. Well, I do sympathise with her, but, having Mill in the house is not a pleasant situation. However, I agreed, because they had no other option. We couldn't leave Mill on her own. I modified the guest room to make a comfortable space for Mill. For the first year, she stayed out of our business. Mostly because she was confined to her bed. We led our usual life, except that Mandy was really busy taking care of her mother along with her full-time job. We had to nurse her mother-in-law when Mandy was at work. Our couple time reduced significantly because Mandy is always busy and tired of juggling so many responsibilities together. I was supportive of her until her mother's mouth was shot. Honestly, I never wanted my mother-in-law to live in my house. Who does? Seeing the situation, I agreed. I took this to be a temporary arrangement, but oh boy, it looks like my mother-in-law is in no mood to leave my house. I mean, she has recovered from her illness. Her fractured bones went back to their places, but this woman doesn't want to go back to hers. She can walk and talk a lot, but she's still lounging at my house for free. I'm not being mean, guys. Imagine living with a mean mother-in-law for 2 years. Mandy and I, we both have full-time jobs. We barely get time for each other during the week. We look forward to the weekend for our quality time. And that too, mother-in-law seems to hijack it. She would ask Mandy to drive her to the hospital for a checkup, maybe a saloon, or for shopping. Every weekend. She has something or other lined up for Mandy. Mother-in-law is fit to drive, yet she doesn't. She says the accident has scared her to go behind the wheel. Fair enough, she can take an Uber, right? No one wants a free ride from Mandy. I protested about it, and Mandy came up with a solution, that I join them. Really? Is that really a solution? I find third wheeling between the mother and daughter duo. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's more to it. As soon as mother-in-law started recovering, she began poking her nose into everything, and I mean everything. She commented on the aesthetics of the house and even the structure, like how things were ill-constructed. She even got her room repainted because, get this, she was unable to vibe with it. Earlier, Mandy used to be annoyed at her mother's snide remarks, but gradually, I found her following her mum's instructions. Yep, she repainted the room, changed the furniture, and even made Mandy change her wardrobe. I hate it when Mandy follows her mum's instructions like a puppet. I often resist her actions and try to make her understand that she should not give in to her mum's demands. At my face, she seemed convinced, but later, I see her doing what her mum told her to do. Upon confrontation, she would just say, "Oh, I changed my mind," or "I realised mum was right, so I did this." These tiny incidents have been piling up inside of me, and last month I burst out at Mandy. I listed down all the incidents that were bothering me. She sobbed and confessed that her mother had been manipulating her. According to Mandy, mother-in-law had been using her accident to manipulate her, saying things like, "Mandy, if I had died in the accident, how lonely your life would have been today. And what if I had another accident and die this time? You'd regret not listening to me, wouldn't you? Such crap. My mother-in-law, if this is true, is really toxic. And Mandy is getting pretty naive to fall for her manipulation. I asked Mandy when mother-in-law would be going back to her place. She was surprised by my question. I don't know what was wrong with that. She blew up. She said she could not wrap her head around that I was anticipating her mother to live on her own after such a frightening accident. I tried to explain that I didn't mean to throw her out, but eventually she should move out, right? Considering the fact that she has gotten back to her former health and she's capable of living on her own. I even suggested that mother-in-law can move closer to our place so that we can reach her immediately in hours of need. But Mandy stuck to the point that how could I ask her mother to leave after such a terrible accident? I couldn't take it anymore and blurted out, "Your mother had an accident and she is recovered. She's not terminally ill, that you cannot part away with her." Mandy stared at me with red blood eyes and said I was wishing terminal illness on her mother. This happened 2 weeks ago and she's still mad at me. I've also not apologised this time. I don't think I said anything wrong. We are not on talking terms. We share the bed, but we face the walls and pretend the other is non-existent. It is becoming very toxic to live in the house. I want to run away. She's mostly spending her time in mother-in-law's room or going out with her. I don't think this is my fault at all, but I do realise that I should have handled this better. Alright, I do want the best for my mother-in-law, but I certainly don't want her in the house. How do I tackle this problem? My reaction for OP. Someone once said the definition of ambivalence is watching your meal drive over a cliff in your new Cadillac. Sounds about right to me. Now, on to the updates. Update 1. My situation has developed in bits and pieces over the last few months. Summarising it, for the sake of relevance, let me start from where I left off. A few days after my post, Mandy hugged me while we were sleeping. She apologised to me, saying she was just a child trying to blow things out of proportion. I wanted to check her stance on shifting mother-in-law to her house, but I held my horses and parked the discussion for later. I didn't want to ruin the moment, you know. She asked me for a date night. I was happy that she was trying to smooth the relationship. Boy, I was wrong. It was a trap. On a perfect dinner outing, she dropped a bombshell that her mother had sold off her house and now she would be living with us permanently. I flipped out. She whispered to me to calm down as others were looking at us. I felt trapped. How could I possibly be calm? I mean, how could she decide this without consulting me? This was not a request or a demand, but an FYI kind of thing. She just dropped the bombshell and expected me to be okay with it. I didn't care to finish off the driver and stormed out. She followed me to the car and insisted we talk. I refused to listen. She yelled that she planned the dinner so that we could discuss this matter outside because her mum would be at home. She knew I would freak out and she didn't want her mum to see us this way. I screamed, "Exactly! That's my point! This is going to happen if she lives with us. We cannot have privacy. Do you want us to spend every evening outside for the rest of our lives? Because we cannot have the house to ourselves?" She murmured that we would have our room for personal time. I asked her then why she didn't give me this news in the room. She said I would scream and her mother would feel bad. It felt like I was talking to a wall. I asked her to go home by herself because I needed space. She refused to leave the car, so I barged out, held a cab and went to a local bar. I called out my colleague, ranted about my miserable life and got drunk. When I went home, I saw Mandy sitting with her mother-in-law in her room. I went to bed and dozed off. My colleague suggested I have a rational conversation with Mandy. I didn't want to, but still gave it a shot. I asked her why mother-in-law sold the house and what was their plan for the future. First, she started sobbing. "You treated me so roughly last night. You stormed out of the restaurant and everyone stared at me, which was so embarrassing. Then I had to drive home alone and explain the whole situation to Mum." I asked why she had to tell her mum everything. She said, "Are you nuts? Mum saw us going out together for a date and then I returned alone with teary eyes. Don't you think anyone would ask the reason?" I said, "No. If you draw the boundary, no one would ask." Anyways, coming to the point of why did your mother sell the house, she trolled around the topic for 10 minutes, only to conclude that her mother-in-law had sold the house to cover her medical bills. And now, get this, she has nowhere to go. Hence, we should be accommodating her in our place. I didn't know what to do. Yelling and anger were not going to help. The fact was, mother-in-law had nowhere to go, and I could not just throw her out on the streets. Yes, they did a terrible thing by dumping their decisions on me instead of discussing it, but what options did I have now? So I let mother-in-law live in my house, but I told Mandy to take this as a temporary arrangement until we figure out a place for her. I also set up some ground rules that mother-in-law would not interfere in our lives, and we shall not include her in any decision-making of our house. Mandy nodded. It went smooth for a month until mother-in-law again started putting her foot in our business. She would comment on our eating habits, living habits, and even my spending habits. She compared me with Mandy's dad, who brought lilies for mother-in-law every Friday. She says I don't spend enough time on Mandy. She says I don't spend enough on Mandy. I admit, I'm not the best in showcasing my feelings, but this doesn't mean I don't love my wife. Mandy, on the other hand, got influenced by her mother and we ended up fighting. It is becoming very difficult to put up with mother-in-law now. I don't see any situation other than asking her to leave. I'm clueless. What would you guys have done in my situation? Update 2. Sorry I couldn't update earlier due to ongoing court cases. Now that everything is over, I'm updating to provide closure to everyone who's been asking for one. This will be a lengthy update, so grab your coffee. Mother-in-law continued to make my life hell, pushing me to my limits. It was on my 8th anniversary last month when things reached a breaking point. I had brought a beautiful dress for Mandy for a surprise dinner. Mother-in-law saw the gift and called me a tightwad for getting a normal gift. To avoid ruining the evening, I ignored her and went to my room. I asked Mandy to get ready, as I had a special plan for her, but she was sulking about the gift. I reassured her that I had planned a memorable evening, far more meaningful than a superficial gift. Despite my efforts, she remained unhappy, upset that I hadn't planned a vacation or bought her a diamond. Meanwhile, I was getting calls from the restaurant where I had booked a rooftop arena decorated with flowers and candles. Mandy's demands ruined everything. I lost my temper. She was fixated on the expensive gift, and I told her if she wanted diamonds, she should have told me in advance. I could have arranged something instead of wasting money on a romantic getaway. Mandy's materialistic shift was frustrating. I suspected her mother's influence. The restaurant manager called to confirm the final details, but Mandy still wasn't ready. I had to cancel the booking and didn't even receive a refund. I yelled at Mandy, accusing her of being manipulated by her mother. In a moment of rage, I called her derogatory names. The argument escalated and I stormed out, spending the night at a friend's place. The next afternoon, I returned home to find the lock changed. Mother-in-law yelled from the window, demanding I apologise and bring diamond jewellery to be let back in. I was shocked and felt like I was being held ransom. Mother-in-law claimed Mandy was at work. I went to Mandy's workplace and discovered she was in cahoots with her mother. Mandy accused me of being a fool and demanded a diamond pendant for me to enter the house. I left, furious. I contacted my dad, who suggested I visit him for a solution. I wasn't ready to give in. I decided to proceed with a divorce. My dad found a lawyer and I asked him to start the paperwork. I also wanted to sell my house as a form of revenge. I listed it for sale and a buyer emerged who had recently gone through a similar situation. I sold the house and moved the payment to my dad's bank account, leaving me with zero assets for the divorce. On the day of the sale, I went to the house with my lawyer and the new owner. Mandy and her mother were at home. I rang the doorbell and mother-in-law answered, cursing. She thought I was there to cause trouble. I said, trouble? Yes, but not the kind you're thinking. When the sheriff arrived, I introduced him and the new owner. Mandy and her mother's faces turned pale as they realised what was happening. Mother-in-law yelled, but I couldn't sell the house without Mandy's approval. I explained that the house deed was in my name only, as I had purchased it before our marriage. Seeing their panic was satisfying. The sheriff served Mandy, who was devastated. She cried and held my hands, but I shrugged her off. Mandy's mother tried to comfort her, but Mandy pushed her away, blaming her for the situation. Mother-in-law was speechless. Mandy begged for a private conversation, and I agreed. She pleaded not to divorce her, claiming she had never cheated and didn't deserve this treatment. I reminded her that I too had never cheated, loved, and cared for her, and even took in her mother. I didn't deserve what she did, so the divorce was my way of evening things out. Mandy cried about their lack of options if I kicked them out. I asked if she cared where I went when she and her mother locked me out. I gave them a 15-day notice to vacate the house. I wasn't legally bound to do so, but I wanted to ensure they left on my terms. They didn't move out even after the notice period. Only when the new owner called the cops did they finally leave. They were forced to live in a motel as they had no relatives willing to help them. During the divorce proceedings, Mandy demanded 50% of my assets, but I had none. My lawyer argued that the house was a gift from my dad and I had returned the money after selling it, so no claim there. Since Mandy is a working woman, she was not entitled to monthly maintenance. Due to our similar income levels, she got almost nothing from a divorce, contrary to her mother's plans. Mandy bombarded my phone with apologies and pleas for another chance, promising to cut ties with her mother. It was too late. The decision was final. Some may think I acted impulsively, but this was the most thought-out decision I could make. Mother-in-law had made my life miserable, and Mandy was becoming like her. I didn't see a solution to getting rid of ex-mother-in-law without losing Mandy, and she had betrayed me. The love and respect I once had for her were gone. I don't know what the future holds, but I can't let anyone use me for the sake of love or marriage. This experience has made me bitter, but I hope to move on and start fresh. I'll keep you updated. Thanks for reading, and sorry for the long rant. If you enjoyed this story, please comment down below. Thank you.